I hope everyone's having a great snow day, an extended 4-day weekend. Sometime before I see you again next Wednesday, I'm going to need you to download your new Heart Notes packet. It's not on the blood one, so you're going to have to go in Classroom and find the new one and download it. And fill out the first section over the functions of the heart, kind of a general overview of how it works, and the external structures. This will allow us to stay on track. It's not that many slides, and you don't have to do the assignment that comes after it because of your snow day. So I think it's totally doable. So let's talk about the heart a little bit. Um, so we know that the heart is part of the cardiovascular system along with blood and blood vessels. So your test is going to be over all three sections. We just finished blood, we'll do a section on the heart, and then we'll do a section on blood vessels. And when we're looking at the cardiovascular system overall, it has three main functions. The first being to distribute dissolved gases, our oxygen and our carbon dioxide. It also distributes nutrients and waste. It helps maintain your body temperature, and it fights off pathogens, foreign invaders into your body. So what we're going to look at with the heart is mostly the distribution of gases, nutrients, and waste throughout our body. So just some kind of basics about your heart. Your heart is about the size of your clenched fists, and it beats about 100,000 times a day. And during those 100,000 beats, it's pumping about 8,000 of liters of blood throughout your body every single day. So in order to beat properly and to distribute that blood throughout our body, our heart is made up of four chambers. The upper chambers are called the atrium. So you have a right atrium and a left atrium. And then the lower chambers are called the ventricles. And again, you have a right and left ventricle. So the right atrium's function is going to receive deoxygenated blood from the body, which we call the systemic circuit. And it's going to push that blood into the right ventricle. Once the right ventricle receives the blood from the right atrium, it's going to pump blood out to the pulmonary circuit, which is our lungs. When blood's in our lungs, it's going to pick up oxygen, and it's going to return to the heart, and it's going to enter through the left atrium and go to the left ventricle. Once that oxygenated blood is in the left ventricle, it's going to go to the systemic circuit or back out to our body. It's going to deliver the oxygen to our body's tissues and then bring back carbon dioxide so we can get rid of it. So let's talk about the two different circuits we have. You're going to hear these over and over again. Your pulmonary circuit is just referring to when blood is going from your heart to your lungs and back to your heart. So basically what's happening is oxygen-poor blood is going to the lungs so it can pick up oxygen, come back so we can distribute that oxygenated blood to our body. So the pathway it takes is that deoxygenated blood will enter the right atrium to the ventricle. It'll travel through the pulmonary arteries, go to the lungs, get oxygen, come back through the pulmonary veins, and enter through the left atrium and then ventricle. So then, in the systemic circuit, what that means is it's the exchange of blood between your body and your heart. So it's blood coming from your body to your heart and then back out to your body. And how that works is it's going to leave the left ventricle and it's going to go through our systemic arteries, the major one being the aorta, and then all the smaller arteries that branch off. It'll go to the capillaries. Capillaries are where gas exchange is going to take place with our tissues. We're going to drop off oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide. That deoxygenated blood is going to come back through our systemic veins and then enter the heart through the right atrium and the right ventricle. You also have to understand the different vessels that are involved with the heart. So we have efferent vessels. Efferent vessels' jobs are to carry blood away from our heart. Those are our arteries. Arteries take blood away from the heart. Where efferent vessels, or our veins, return blood to the heart. So arteries carry blood away, veins bring blood into the heart. And then we have our exchange vessels, or our capillaries, where that exchange of dissolved gases is taking place. So this diagram is just showing you the two circuits. You have your pulmonary circuit, which is taking blood from your heart to your lungs and back, and your systemic circuit, which is taking blood from your body to your heart and then back out to your body. And remember, your blood is never blue. If it's shown in blue on this diagram, it's just showing you that that's deoxygenated blood and the path that it takes to become oxygenated. So let's talk about where your heart is located in your body. So your heart is going to sit a little bit below or posterior to your sternum, about your third left rib. The point of our heart, or the very bottom of our heart, is called the apex of our heart. And you have to think all the way back to our first unit when we talked about body cavities. Our heart is found in our thoracic body cavity, but specifically in the mediastinum. The mediastinum, which is the ear that's going to house our heart. The mediastinum is found between your two pleural cavities, which hold your lungs. And within those cavities, your heart sharing space with some blood vessels, your thymus, your trachea, and your esophagus. So this picture is just kind of showing you the location of your heart. It's going to sit on the left side of your body, a little bit below that sternum. And then this is kind of if we were looking like from above. So you can see you have your heart in the mediastinum, you have your pleural cavities, which are your lungs, and then this whole area we call together the thoracic cavity. So your heart is surrounded by a protective membrane or layers called the pericardium. And the pericardium has an inner layer and an outer layer. So what that inner layer does, the inner layer technically has like three, or I guess two sections to it. So there's going to be the inner visceral layer, which is going to line the internal surface. So that's what's going to actually be touching your heart. And then you're going to have an outer parietal layer, which is going to cover the outside surface. So in between those two layers, there's going to be pericardial fluid. Pericardial fluid is what reduces friction between the layers during heartbeats. So when your heart beats, these two layers can nicely work together without any friction, and everything works great. But if that fluid for some reason is low or becomes inflamed, that's when we're going to have some pathologies, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And then you have the outer layer of your pericardium. So this outer fibrous layer is going to surround the serous layer and just helps hold your heart in place. And so you can see in this picture of this heart, you can see that this person is cutting away the pericardial membrane, the pericardium. And the other picture is showing you where the pericardial fluid would be and how it's attached to other structures in our body so it holds our heart in place. So like I said, the pericardium can have some pathologies. And so in order to diagnose those pathologies, we use a stethoscope, or an ultrasound can be used to listen to heart sounds. So the main pathology of the pericardium is called pericarditis, which is inflammation of the pericardium. And this can happen for several reasons. It could be from like a bacterial or a viral or a fungal infection that causes this inflammation of the pericardium, the layer that's surrounding our heart. It can also happen when people have heart attacks or heart surgery. So what happens with pericarditis is there's something called a friction rub. And a friction rub is a scratching sound. So if you were listening to someone's heart with a stethoscope instead of a normal heartbeat, you'd kind of hear this scratching, because what's happening is the layers of the pericardium are rubbing together. There's not enough pericardial fluid to prevent friction anymore. And then there's another disorder called cardiac tamponade, which is just your pericardium is filled with too much fluid, which is going to affect the way your heart beats. This slide is just showing you different ways that you can get pericarditis: bacterial infections, injuries, compression. And so the last thing you're going to have to take notes over is the superficial or the external anatomy of the heart, which we'll look at in not next week, but the following when we dissect the heart. You're going to know all these different parts. So the apex of the heart is the pointed tip at the very bottom. The coronary sulcus. The coronary sulcus is a groove where you're going to find arteries and blood vessels, or I guess arteries are blood vessels, but you're going to find blood vessels and fat in this groove, and this groove is a border between the atria, the upper chambers of your heart, and the ventricles, the lower chamber. You also have an interventricular sulcus, which again is where you're going to find blood vessels and fat, and this is the boundary line between your right and left ventricles. You have your right auricle or atrium. Your right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body. It's going to send that deoxygenated blood to the right ventricle, which pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The left auricular atrium is going to receive oxygenated blood from the lungs and then send that oxygenated blood to the left ventricle so the left ventricle can pump it out to the body. So we'll label, when we're back in class, we'll kind of label this, but this diagram is just showing you where your right atrium is and your right ventricle. You can see here, this is your coronary sulcus, which separates your atrium from your ventricles. And you can see that our arteries and veins are found within the sulcus as well as fat. And you can also see over here that this is the interventricular sulcus, which is going to separate the right from the left ventricle. If we look at the heart from the back, the posterior view, you can see the left ventricle, the right ventricle, you can see your interventricular sulcus, and your coronary sulcus. And that's where we're going to stop today. So make sure you catch up on these notes before Wednesday, and have a great weekend.